Hello, I'm Simon and welcome to the SciRob YouTube channel, and in today's video I'm going to be replacing the lower control arm ball joint. So these procedures, which I'm just running through briefly on here, they've been filmed a few times before, so I'm just adding in some footage and just briefly showing the undoing of various components, including the track rod end, the ABS sensor. The procedure for this is pretty difficult to it's difficult to replace the ball joint whilst the car's only just off the ground, so I'm opting for the removal of the entire hub assembly. The circle there is just to remind you to remove the ball joint nut, which is on my car I think it was a T40 and a 21mm, but I just buzzed that off with a impact wrench. And yeah, so I decided to remove the hub assembly just because it's just a lot easier to work on it with it in front of you on the ground rather than trying to struggle underneath, and you're just not going to get the leverage to get the ball joint off. So it's fairly advanced. This isn't a job that I would say, you know, someone should do as a very first job on a car. You need to really research this job and be sure you've got a decent toolkit and a plan B and a plan C as well, because it's pretty tricky. So so I finally got the hub assembly off, having taken off all those other bits and just using my impact wrench, just removing the bolts. So all that's holding the ball joint into the hub assembly then is it's basically a very, very strong press fit. The ball joint itself has splines on it, and the steering knuckle also has splines that they interact with each other and keep everything in place. So I'm just popping some penetrating fluid along the seam. You can clean up the seam with a wire brush, Dremel wire brush, whatever really. I'm just showing, you know, even though the boot is in reasonable condition still, the ball joint does move around a lot. It would still be fine probably for an MOT, but it was a cheap replacement. They were £20 each from eBay, and that was using quality parts from Febi. And yeah, so I thought I'd just get it done whilst we were having some good weather. So to get into the seam, I just basically used a succession of very slim to thick flat bladed screwdrivers, and just trying to wedge it in around near the bolt holes, trying to avoid the splined area. And it's going to be almost impossible not to create a little bit of damage on the hub assembly, but as long as you're accurate with your blows, it's just a little shaving of it and it doesn't change the integrity of the hub assembly. So once I've got a reasonable gap, I then put in a slim screwdriver on one side and working a thicker screwdriver on the other side. The slim screwdriver stops it from closing on itself. And then once you've got the screwdrivers in far enough, you can then start to get some leverage and just drag the ball joint out. Like I say, it's just held in just by those splines and a very, very close press fit. In fact, the fit is so close you can see it. Well, I mean, it's just spotless. That's done 200,000 miles, but absolutely no debris can get in there because the fit's so close. So for my car, it was Volvo part number 274548, and so I used the Febi Bilstein equivalent of that. But as I said right at the start in the captions, you need to research your parts on this because they can change ball joint part numbers within chassis ranges of cars, even when the cars look the same and are from similar model years. So do be careful when you're researching your parts on this. And you can see on the new ball joint just how it's so much more difficult to manoeuvre around with that fresh joint, which hasn't been used obviously. So I'm just very lightly using the screwdriver, sandpaper and a Dremel wire brush just to clean up the mating surfaces. I don't want any tiny bits of swarf from the aluminium getting in the way. I want the ball joint to press flush against the housing, and also with the bolt holes, I also popped some brake cleaner on some kitchen towel and just cleaned out the bolt holes as well. Just gets rid of any old thread lock, and also if there's any metal swarf in there that's gone in there from the cleaning process, you don't want that getting in the threads and derailing the threads and having a cross-threaded situation. So to help things along even more, just used a smear of brake grease around the inside of the ball joint housing, and also put the same brake grease around the splines of the ball joint itself. It's such a close press fit. Greasing it is not going to have any issues with how well it stays in. It's going to be, you know, very securely press fitted in, and then you're going to have the bolts to hold it in place. So it's a kind of version of the official method of doing this. So I'm using the original bolts just as guides to make sure that the ball joint is aligned before I start hammering it in, and then I just apply some very light taps on the left and right just to get things started. And I used a 30mm socket here just to start dragging down the front edge of the splines into the housing. And it's not about being rough and huge hammer blows, nothing like that. It's about being accurate and just slowly but surely working your way around. You know, spend as long as you want, 10-15 minutes, however long is necessary, just slowly but surely putting it in. And each time you're doing it, just make sure, just keep checking your work part way through to make sure those holes align. So it's all the way in now, and the holes are aligned, and so the bolts will go in fine. If they're slightly out of line, take the thing out and redo it. Don't try and put bolts into misaligned holes, because steel bolts on an aluminium thread will strip the thread, and you'll end up having to replace the whole hub assembly and swap out the wheel bearing, and yeah, just a whole world of pain. So take your time. This isn't a job for beginners, I can't stress that enough. So I'm just going to be popping some brake grease on the control arm on the cone section, and that will just help it'll help for the future removal whenever it needs to come off, but it also helps the ball joint to locate and sit in place nicely as everything's then tightened up. And it's not raining there, that is literal sweat just pouring off me. It was one of the hottest days of the year. We've got some crazy humid, hot, sultry weather in the UK at the moment, and I definitely picked the worst day to do this. I was working in the sunshine and everything. It was hard work. So once you've pushed the control arm down, you then line up the bottom bolt for the shock absorber to align with the hub. And once you've got that one bolt in, the bottom bolt, everything else gets a whole lot easier. It's pretty easy then to start aligning up the splines of the drive shaft, so it goes back in through the wheel bearing, and also you then just line up the top bolt for the shock, because the bottom bolt's in, the top bolt should already be pre-aligned really, and goes in nice and easily there. And then you can just put the brake disc back on the brake caliper, the track rod end, the drive shaft bolt, and and get an alignment done after changing ball joints. You've disassembled the whole suspension area. So I thought I'd just include this as a bonus, just to give you an idea of, you know, this is a procedure that, say, this is the Volvo main dealer workshop, and it's where you see at the start in the blue text all of the special tools which a Volvo main dealer workshop is recommended to use on this. You've got ball joint splitters, a particular arm, like a long bar designed to pull the control arm down. There's a slide hammer attachment to drag the old ball joint out. But which would be fair enough if the car's high up in the air and you've got the swing on it. But like I say, when you're working almost on the ground, all of this particular method for removing the ball joint and reinstalling it using the special socket which covers all the ball joint and the guide pins, you've got no chance doing it on the ground, or you've got some chance, but it's difficult. But I thought I'd just include that procedure just to show you an alternative view. And that's it. I hope you find that useful, and thanks very much for watching.